Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Gym Goss. And today you are joined by myself and Samuel Schepis. Samuel, let's
So,
talk about programming pain points. So, we are coaches and we mentor and house a lot of coaches as well. So, we wanted to discuss today some of the challenges that coaches have when it comes to programming. Obviously, this is an integral role that a coach plays for their client, and it's their bread and butter. And in many cases, will make or break the results that the client can achieve. If you don't program very well, your clients don't follow your programs, it's going to be very hard to progress your clients. So we're going to talk about some of the things that we've seen coaches struggle with, or that we struggle with ourselves, and try to give you guys insights into how you can overcome these challenges, as well as take a look at the common approaches coaches take with their programming, their methods, as well as the tools that they use to deliver programs, such as apps, Excel spreadsheets, and everything in between. So, Samuel, I'll hand it over to you. What are some of the challenges you face when programming?
I think for most coaches, like the problems faced are going to be, somewhat universal. Always weighing up, what's optimal with what's practical is probably the number one conundrum that I think I face is like, a client's goals maybe, to get stronger. And it's like, okay, but then they don't enjoy doing all the work that's necessary to get stronger in particular exercises. And I think like having just a good starting point, like obviously, humans, we're just creatures of habits. And I think, while every single person is different, every coach will have these kind of like nuances and a particular style in which they program, how they start that program writing and creation process. For me, it might be like I think as you begin coaching and getting into it, it's like working out a good approach to the overarching framework and decision making and how you get to the end program. Okay, so where are we starting? How many days are you going to be training? Like working out what the constraints that they provide you. I've only got 45 minutes to train. I can only train 3 times a week. I hate doing squats, whatever it might be. And then taking that information and coming up with a program that blends optimal with practical as much as possible. So I think, just establishing a robust starting point and a good system for building programs that is reliable and will foster good results for your clients is probably the number one pain point. Like once you kind of get through that, then it's a matter of, overcoming other problems like troubleshooting technique, right? Teaching them how to utilize, your intensity metrics or how to train sufficiently hard, knowing when to make certain decisions. And I think a lot of that comes later. First and foremost, it's, getting them like starting the program writing process and working out how you can do that whilst managing all the, the ins and outs of that individual. Are they going to enjoy it? Is it practical for them? Do they have the time to do it? Can they even, do those exercises? Right. I think they're like the main pain points that I would face. I think pretty much every coach would face in some capacity. Obviously, some clients are going to be easier. Some clients you can just go anything you throw at them, they're going to be good with. And I think that comes with experience, knowing your way around the gym, knowing different exercises and building that rapport and relationship as a coach. Or if you have a new client and they're quite experienced and they already know these things, those teething processes from a programming standpoint, I think are often streamlined. Like, how many times would you, Jake, you get a client who's been training for like, 6 years, and then all of a sudden, they come to you and you're like, you don't have to do anything. It's like, you're just like steering the ship now. It's not anything super drastic and off you go.
Yeah, I think you raised a lot of really good points there. And I think the most important thing for a lot of new coaches is to actually have a good understanding of the training principles, and how to achieve, at a, both a theoretical and a practical level, the outcomes that their clients are training for. So you've got to understand strength if you're training people to develop their strength. So you've got to have some idea of biomechanics. You've got to understand, some physiology around strength. So how we develop the skill of a lift. What that looks like in practice. How to then individualize that to different people who come with different training abilities, injuries, leverages, all of these kind of things. For muscle growth, it's like the physiology of muscle growth, how that looks, in a program, and what's required to actually increase muscle size. So, things like the role of volume and intensity for both strength, hypertrophy, and all this kind of stuff, as well as, the more procedural knowledge of how to actually teach people how to train and lift. And that's a separate part of programming, but it feeds into the success of the program. But you do have to have a lot of knowledge. And I guess that's the first issue I see a lot of coaches running up against, is just not knowing the foundations, because they don't get that education in their Cert 3 and 4 or their PT qualification. There's a lot of misinformation and conflicting information online. And there's just sound bites. There's not a lot of really thorough, in-depth resources that teach people the fundamental principles of exercise science. I think that's the first step. And if you are someone who's coaching and you have a good idea of this, the next step is to develop a framework for your program design and having a system. As you said, Sammy, I think that's critical. You've got to have a methodical way that you go about putting your programs together, from, the tools you're going to use, the apps and Excel spreadsheets. You've got to have all that set up. And then you've got to have a process to, gather information from the client, a questionnaire or a screening tool, collecting video and data on the client's, training, so that you can use that to inform your decision making in the program. But in our mentorship course, we actually cover this, and Brian Miner, his system's fantastic, and it's a simple 6-step system. So step 1 is, defining the objective, asking the right questions. Begins with understanding the role of training at that point in time. Like, what are we trying to train for? What are we trying to achieve? We're trying to build size. Where are we trying to build size? Are we trying to increase strength on what exercises? What are the developmental needs of that individual, in an acute sense and a long-term sense? Step 2 is looking at those tools that you have available, and the tools are just the training variables. So you've got to know the variables. And it's always surprising to me when I give a presentation or I speak to other coaches, I'll say, what are the training variables? And some of the answers are just bewildering. It's like, man, this is like, foundational stuff that every coach should know, volume, intensity, frequency, exercise selection. And you have to have a good grasp of those tools, as I said earlier. And then step 3 is using those tools strategically in the way that you design the program. So, how do you distribute volume across a week? What intensities are you going to train at? What frequencies are you going to pick for certain muscle groups, certain lifts? And I think when we get to this stage, a lot of coaches fall in the trap of doing what they've always done, and just, replicating programs and making small modifications without actually thinking. And the cool thing about program design is that if you stick to the principles, which are specificity, progressive overload, fatigue management, individualization, and then the principles of strength and hypertrophy and what it takes to actually drive those adaptations, you have a lot of flexibility, and leeway in how you actually go about that step 3, which is using the variables to uphold the principles, right? And this is where, I think it's a good thing to have an approach or a style that works, because you've got experience with that style or approach. And that's extremely important, because, if you just always make things up, you don't know if it works. It's just an experiment at that point. It's not, leaning into prior experience, which is a really useful thing for coaches to do. And then, step 4 of Brian's model is to be patient, know what to expect. So, having realistic rates of, progress, communicating that, managing, expectations on both ends. And then step 5 and 6 are to assess the strategy. Are you progressing at the desired rate? And then step 6 is refining that strategy. And I think within all this, the tools that you use to deliver the program really need to encompass what is important, right? It's like you need to be measuring the things that you want to manage. And on a coach end, if you're trying to get somebody bigger, you need to be measuring things like set volume per week per muscle group, volume load. You need to be measuring, their quad girth if they want to build bigger quads. You've got to be measuring scale weight, and you have to have ways to track this stuff. So there's a lot of moving parts, and I think that is one of the issues I see a lot of coaches face. Is there's a heap of shit to do if you're going to do it properly, and it can be overwhelming, and that then that trickles down to the client. When there's too much going on, the client gets overwhelmed. So there's always this balance, for coaches and their clients between giving them the program that has all the things they need to obviously do and execute in order to achieve their goals. But then not too much that it's overwhelming and they don't adhere to it, don't track their workouts, and don't, log information that this gives you less of an idea as to what's going on.
Yeah, you really have to pick your bang for buck metrics for each individual, and they're not going to be the same. And I think that's okay. It's like there's a lot of people it's like, oh, you're tracking your weight or you're tracking this, tracking RIRs. Like, tracking RIRs and RPEs is like great, but far out, not absolutely everyone is going to want or need to train them, to track them. Sorry. Like if you're going into the gym every week and you're trying to like push pretty close to failure and you're, doing that regularly, do you really need to track absolutely every RIR? Maybe not. It's like if you're trying to go in and you're basically, your objective is to beat what you did last week, week on week on week, you're still progressing, right? For some people, that's going to be okay. For other people, they're just not interested. They just want to go in and, feel good. Again, like you said, knowing what their objectives are. Not everyone wants to be an elite athlete or a bodybuilder or, what have you. So it does really need to be tailored to the individual. And I guess the more information that you can gather from the outset, the more effective you can be in determining what is worth tracking for that individual to make sure that they're satisfied. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. Like we want to get them stronger. We want to make them feel better, more jacked, look better, but we want them to enjoy the process first and foremost. And, it's like if you're overwhelming them being like, oh, here's this spreadsheet, you need to track 500 different things. I want you to check in, 6 times a week. I want you to make sure you have 4 liters of water, doing 10,000 steps and all this stuff. And it just becomes, like you said, overwhelming, and that can potentially demotivate them. And then if you're demotivating them, you're not actually your program. And, the program isn't just confined to what you're doing in the gym. It's, it's everything. The whole thing is the program, like what you're setting. So we just want to make sure that everything aligns with that individual, and we are being somewhat strategic. And again, like taking it back to that, just having a framework of how you approach it, what information you determine is appropriate and what's necessary, and then applying it to the individual.
Yeah, I think if you have a really good framework for your programming, eventually over time, you realize that you have certain types of clients and you can categorize them, and create approaches that are more tailored to those types of clients. As you were saying, there's some people, who just want the program. They don't really want to track anything. They're just going to try to, lift more than last week, and they'll remember what they lifted roughly, and so on and so forth. And you can create a program for those kind of people where it's just like, here's your exercises, your sets and reps, and off you go. Like, try to add weight kind of thing. And then you might have clients who are super neurotic. They want all the details. They want to track everything down to the, kilo or rep, and they want to see their progress, mapped on charts and graphs and things like this. And you can create, an approach for them. And then being able to determine whether or not this person is going to be more suited to this style of programming or that. is the next step, and it becomes a lot easier. If you have a number of different approaches that you can use for varying clients. And I think something that most coaches don't do is just ask the question. I always ask my clients when I'm starting out with them, would you prefer a spreadsheet, to track everything, or would you rather use our app, which we'll talk about shortly, or do you want, pen and paper and a logbook? You have to be adaptive with, your clients and feed into what's going to work best for them. And I think there's a lot of benefit to just asking questions and, getting that input from them and letting them help you make those decisions,
Yeah,
as opposed to guessing.
I think a lot can be said to involving the client in the programming process as well. It's like, you know, drawing on my uni days, like managing change. That was one of my subjects way back when. And it's like change management is like so much more effective when you're involving the people who the change is going to impact in the process of decision making. Even if they're not even if they're not making any of the decisions, make them feel like they are, make them feel like they've been involved. It's like you might in your mind be like, this person like 3 days a week is all they're going to do, and they come back to you and say, oh, yeah, I can do 5 days, and it's like, oh, and then just talk them through. And like, even though you've gone to them, be like, oh, how many days do you want? They've told you 5. Like, you don't necessarily have to actually write a 5-day program, because at the end of the day, if you're the expert and they're coming to you, they should be trusting you. But having that conversation, speaking to them about it, getting their thoughts, providing more insight onto why you may be like, I think we can start with 3. And hey, this is going to be the approach. And then all of a sudden they buy into it. And, that's like the number one thing for, coaches or people who are selling something. It's like, we want to create buy-in to the point where people just like inherently trust us. And obviously, the good coaches, the cream will rise to the top sort of situation. But again, having conversations, getting information, and the information gathering doesn't just stop because you've done an induction. You should always be, the learning process about your clients should be an ongoing thing. You should be always finding more information about their lifestyle, their likes, dislikes, their tendencies, the type of like what their weekends look like, what their average weekday looks like. All of these things will like further inform the program. And as you continue to develop, that coach client relationship, you might find out a little bit more and you go, oh, okay. So like, you're not really doing a whole heap of activity outside of this. So, maybe we can start to actually program in some high intensity interval training, because, basically you train and then you sit at home behind a desk working for 5 days of the week. Right. And then on the weekends, you don't do any activity. Right. And just like trickling these things in as you find more and more and more out. And, just like always asking questions and having these conversations, and not being closed to the possibility that there's more. Right. And like that, there's always a possibility that the program you wrote is not the best. And that's okay. Right. It's just like, maybe from the first instance, it's a starting point. Right. Any program will be good enough if it kind of ticks some basic boxes, they apply effort to it. But there's certain things need to happen to get to that point, and for them to be able to apply effort and for it to actually work to at least a degree. And then it's just a matter of, refining that process and trying to make it better and more optimal for that individual.
Yeah, that's exactly what good programming is all about, is individualizing the approach. And I've always said this to mentorship students and coaches that I work with, that if you tick the principles and you have specificity checked off, there's progressive overload, there's some fatigue management, and individualization. If you do those 4 things, what really drives the success of a program after that is buy-in, is how much the client is willing to work hard with the program you've together. And that's going to, mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. For some people, buying into a program is, trusting in the coach and their expertise. For others, it's the enjoyment side of things, and people are always referencing, what they're doing now to what they've done in the past. And I think this is a really important point for coaches to be aware of, is that an individual's exercise history influences their perception of effective training in a really meaningful way. For example, if you have someone who comes to you to build muscle and get leaner, right? They want to improve their physique and body composition. And historically, they've been a runner, right? What they think works for, getting lean, or, if they've lost weight running and things like this, is going to be drastically different to what or think is going to work at improving their body composition. And they're going to compare how it feels, when they do a strength workout to how it feels when they used to go running. And if their heart rate's not up, they're not going to feel like they've worked hard, even though they've taken a set, to failure. It's not going to feel as hard as running 10Ks, in a immediate sense anyway, right? They're not going to have that, lactic acid build up over, a longer period of time. Sure, they'll miss one rep and that's hard. They might be out of breath for a couple of minutes, but, they won't be able to breathe for, a few minutes until their heart rate drops back down, 20 minutes after that run. Knowing these kind of things can really equip a coach with more insights into how to get buy-in from a client, because you need to always juggle those, two, balls essentially of what the client wants and what they need. And usually when someone's starting out, they don't really have much of an idea as to what's required to achieve their goals, because they've got some incorrect beliefs and assumptions about, say, fat loss, hypertrophy. They think they need to train to failure and eat low carb diets and all this kind of stuff. You can't just give them what they need, which is probably leaving reps in reserve, eating more carbs and having a sustainable approach, because that's not what they believe. If they don't believe that, and you just give them something that's completely, contradicting their, ingrained beliefs and assumptions, they're not going to buy into it. You have to give them a little bit of what they want. So you might give them some training to failure and a little bit of training that's, further from failure, and start to teach them about that. You might give them low carbs, 5 days a week, and then a little bit more carbs on the weekends, and slowly trickle that in, so that hopefully over time, through that educational process, their wants, actually line up with their needs. Because then when that occurs, then the magic happens, because they're bought into the process. When there's that tension and, separation between what they want and what they actually need, you can't get results. No program is going to work, and there's going to be no buy-in if somebody wants something different to what they need. It isn't going to work. And I always teach people, and I try to do this myself, that, when you're trying to change someone's beliefs, you can't come out swinging and try to, go in there and knock it down. You got to be like a Trojan horse. You got to go in,
Right.
say, yeah, cool. I understand that. And, ask questions, and don't tell them they're wrong, and
You
slowly
want to
drop
accept them. You
information.
want them to try and debunk their own
Yeah.
beliefs.
You want them to, exactly right. You want them to be the ones who are like, oh, wow, that was wrong. Not necessarily because you told them so. But this is all important for program. We'll tie it back because, as I said, buy-in is huge. If you tick a few boxes, you're not doing anything stupid like crazy high volume, ridiculous amounts of, sets per muscle group, all that kind of stuff. Your program will work if it's, specific. There's overload, fatigue management, you individualize it. But really after that, the client has to buy in, and you have to get them to invest, and those wants and needs need to line up. So I think we've spoken a bit about the coaching end and what's obviously, the dilemma that coaches faces on an ongoing basis. But what about the clients? What do you see your clients struggle with when it comes to all the things, following a program or program related?
I think the biggest struggle is, well, and there's like levels of struggles depending on where the individual is at. I think for newer clients, the struggle is probably applying effort, or like understanding how to most appropriately apply effort, and when doing more and working a bit harder and, pushing, maybe increasing the weight, adding some reps is appropriate. And for more advanced lifters, it's probably just the overall buy-in into the process. And like once progress stalls, right? Like you got to just trust it. And I think like that's hard, trusting that a program will work and buying into it. Because there are times where you might go backwards. You might look at progress and be like, I swear I was lifting more than this on this exercise, 2-3 months ago. Why am I lifting, less now? And, again, just having that trust that the things that are happening now will pay off down the track, that delayed gratification, and, really believing and having like, faith in your coach and their ability to get you to where you want to be. And then being diligent enough to continue following that plan when you may be like, you see other people and they're like, why are they doing something else? And you know that. And then the third problem would be like people chop and change too frequently. And that can get boring. And embracing the kind of boring monotony that is training, it's like it's not really a sexy or exciting process. I mean, you go into the gym, you lift some stuff, it gets slow, your technique breaks down, it's hard, you make faces, you sweat, you grunt, then you leave. Nothing really changes on a daily scale, like not noticeably anyway. And then you go and repeat it again and again and again, weeks up, like, and then after 5 years, you look like you've started training. And you've got to buying into the time investment that is, a lot of these ventures. Like they just take time, and then they're not like a short-term fix. It's like a lifestyle. Trying to get people to buy into that it can be tough. But I think beginners applying enough effort.
I think beginners applying effort. But I think, as you said, the main thing that I see now with a lot of lifters is this, desire to follow trends. And if something's trending online, or if there's, a new gym that's come out, or, there's this new personal trainer who's, training this person that, they aspire to be like, whatever the case is. There's just a lot of, I guess, distraction from what they're currently doing. And instead of being focused on, cool, what am I doing now and how can I make that better? There seems to be a lot of people who look for something different to fix the problems that they face, instead of actually looking at what's causing the problems now and how they can improve that. Because seldom is it a new program that's going to radically change someone's physique, or a different coach, or even a different approach. Most of the time it's about, okay, what am I doing now? Okay, I'm doing this really, really well, but I'm not doing this well at all. So how can I improve that? And if you improve that, then it's just on to the next thing. And I see this a lot with, the clients I work with. I had one guy recently, he made some great progress, during the 6-month period, lost 8 kilos, strength increase, built a lot of muscle, and all of a sudden started to plateau. And I said to him, okay, well, let's look at what we're doing. And he was doing, just by virtue of his schedule, his 4 workouts, which were upper, lower, in succession in 4 days.
Yes.
Okay. Do we have, room to split these up a little bit? Do day 1, day 2, rest, day 3, rest, day 4, rest. And he's like, yeah, I can do that. And he's pretty committed and he was on board with that. So I was like, cool, we'll do that. So we did that. And then for like 8 weeks, his training just blew up.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden it slowed down again. Okay. I said, cool. You've lost 8 kilos. You're now eating a bit more food. Let's look at that. I said, when are you having your meals? How are you distributing that across the day? And he was basically having lunch at 12 and then training at like 4:30 without eating. I said, great. Let's have a pre-workout meal 2 hours before you train and move some calories around. He started doing that. Hey, presto, his lift started improving. So it wasn't about going back to the program and saying, oh, we need to change the program, or we need a different approach. It was looking at all of the other things that facilitate the program and trying to improve those, in a methodical manner, like one at a time, working through them. And I think if people did this more, they would definitely see better results from the programs that they're on. And don't get me wrong, there's some shit programs out there, and there are cases where you should certainly change your approach.
I think that's that example's like a really good one, because it shows that you trusted what you're doing would work first and foremost, but there was the furtherance of information gathering. Like, it wasn't just like, oh yeah, maybe we need to change a program, or the inherent belief that maybe they're doing something wrong. It's like, okay, tell me more. What are things looking like? And then, okay, the order of your training, it's not really allowing for maybe the optimum, structure for your week. You're not getting enough rest time between your sessions. Let's address that. And then when that's no longer working, what else can you address? It's like, this guy obviously already he was doing 90% of the work really well. And now it's like, he's got a lot of really good results. He's made a lot of progress with that, with a really good foundation. Now it's a matter of, where are those 1%ers that can be improved. And I think that's a natural progression for a lot of clients as well. As they become a little bit more invested in the process, it's like, okay, how can I get more out of this? How can I, like, is 2 sessions enough? Is my 2 sessions enough? And that's where the coach comes in and goes, well, you can probably train 3 times a week. And they're like, oh yeah, but I can't afford to train with you 3 times a week. And it's like, well, you don't need to train with me. You look how, like, you've advanced pretty well. We can write a program for you where you're comfortable doing it on your own. And it's like, now you're kind of advancing them further, and they feed into that process. And the more information they get or can provide you, the more you can drive that process forwards for their benefit and your benefit as a coach as well. I mean, if you do a good job, they'll go off and talk to their friends, their family, and say, oh, like, I had stalled. I wasn't progressing. And then, this guy told me, maybe I should restructure my training sessions. And all of a sudden I was progressing again. It's like, that stuff kind of hits home for people. I think where it can be very transactional in the initial thinking when people come in and they pay for the coaching services or, personal training or a gym membership. They're like, all right, I've paid, now I should get results. And it's like, you can get,
happen. You got to do
yeah, well, we spoke about it today. It's like, you can get pretty much anyone who is never really lifted weights. If they just came in and trained for a month, you'll get them stronger. Right. But it's like, once they're kind of like, running out of those newbie gains and, they're kind of somewhat invested in the process, it's like, how do you get them to further invest? And how do you actually advance someone from, when they're entering that intermediate stage to like being more advanced?
Yep. And that's where I think the problem solving, the skill of problem solving is one that coaches don't focus on enough. And I know that I didn't focus on it anywhere near as much as what I do now. When I was, starting out coaching the first few years that, I was working with people, I wasn't even thinking about solving problems. I was just like trying to keep clients, get clients, make some money, pay the bills. Like there wasn't really the focus. But I think that's putting the cart before the horse, right? You got to put the horse first, which is being a good problem solver. Because if you're a good problem solver, you're going to be a good coach. You retain clients, you'll get them results. They'll tell their friends. Their friends, will come down and work with you, and other people will hear about how good you are as a coach, and everything sort of flows from there. And yeah, you've got to be a master at identifying the problem in the first place and knowing the causal factor, right? And not just looking at a problem going, oh, your strength stalled, it must be your technique, or it must be volume, or it must be intent, but actually being able to identify what's causing the problem, and then having the experience to know how to maneuver through that problem, and providing those solutions and the correct solution, and that's going to mean and look very different for every situation that you're up against a problem.
Yeah, agreed.
And, I guess we can talk about now a lot of the current programming tools that coaches use, which is quite interesting in this day and age. We've got,
Many options.
The abundance of options now. Back when, we started coaching, there wasn't even Excel, I don't think, or it wasn't a common approach. It was, PDF, you send it through, that was it. I started writing
piece of paper.
I started writing programs on, program cards at the gym. I think, I'm a dinosaur when it comes to this stuff. So let's talk about the pros and cons of, the various approaches. So obviously there's training apps, and they're really popular now. And I think they're really beneficial because they're super clean, they're neat, in many cases easy to use for the user. I think they're a very user-friendly approach. I think a lot of them are actually not really that friendly for the coach, because they lack, I guess, freedom, like creative freedom in like how the coach goes about programming. Like you're quite constrained, and they can be quite, yeah, regimented in the way that you have to go about your programming. You can't really do it as you would, if you're just putting pen to paper and have that sort of free flow of ideas. It's quite, yeah, broken in that sense. And yeah, have you used any apps? You haven't, I don't think.
Me, I have not. No, I think I used Gravitas like once or twice just to kind of see what it was like. I've had clients who have used apps, but for the most part, up until like recently, I really found a well, like I saw a lot of like really complicated like apps, spreadsheets, and stuff like that. And like we spoke about earlier, like for a lot of the coaching process, you know, are we overcomplicating it? Like what for me in coaching the clients that I was working with, I was always of the vein of how can I simplify this to a point where you can action it and not fuck it up, and action it effectively and get the most out of it. Now, of course, there are going to be some individuals who maybe we need to be tracking a little bit more. It's like, and we can kind of vary it, but for the most part, what I've used for the last nearly decade has been, Google Sheets or Excel, right? Like very basic programming, and now moving to the app that obviously we're creating because, well, frankly, we're building it and it's doing all the things that we're saying absolutely essential from a coaching and programming standpoint. What you want to track, what we as coaches want to be able to see, and I think this is the first and probably the only app I'll use for training programming because, well, as I said, it's ours. Like it will do all the things that we need and want. We'll drive that process, and we'll also have our clients driving that process, which I think is most important. And yeah, this is the first time I've used anything other than that for client programming or my own training. I find it like super easy. Some other apps are a little bit complicated. I think they maybe miss the mark to a degree because they want to like wow people with all these like functions, features, like all these numbers and stuff. And it's just like, is that too much? For me personally, yes. I think simple is a little bit better. Like you said, again, like drawing back on what you said at the start, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I think we don't need all these smoke and mirrors. We just need like a good sound system that you can reliably deliver programming. You can monitor the things that the coach needs to see. We can compare performance, in some convenient fashion from session to session, week to week, exercises over time, monitor maybe your weight, maybe girth measurements, things like that. And everything else is kind of like the rest is just additional, which is add-ons.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. A lot of the apps are definitely either falling into one of two categories. They're too complicated, and there's too much going on, and they're just hard to navigate for the coach and the client, or they're too simple and they're gimmicky and they're designed for like mass production, large scale sort of sales. Think about your fitness influencers who creating a program and then trying to sell that to thousands of people. So yeah, we wanted to create something for coaches that hits the mark. It's got all the things that Sam said before. It's got the key metrics that you want to be monitoring if you're somebody who knows what they're doing. We want to give the coaches some freedom and creative license within the app as well, and the software in terms of how they use it, the features and functions that they choose or don't choose to use with their clients. But then for the client, just something neat and simple that's easy to use. But I think Excel spreadsheets, has many benefits. So that's why a lot of coaches use it, because that creativity and simplicity at which you can write a program is a huge feature. And don't get me wrong, Excel has a lot of bugs. People hate using Excel on their phone. It can be quite limited in what it can do, and it takes a lot of knowledge in Excel to be able to maximize a lot of the features, and not everyone's able to do that to the level that they could if they were using an app, for example. But at the same time, I think we'll probably always be in a situation where we have a different approach for different clients. We'll have some clients on an app, some on a spreadsheet. Even now at the moment, I've probably got about 60% more, 70% of my clients on the app, and then I've got 30% on the spreadsheet still, because some people still like that. But yeah, I think all in all, good program design, if we track back to where the conversation first started, you got to know your shit.
Mm-hmm.
You got to know how to get the result. You got to know what the job entails on your end and the client's end, be able to communicate that in an effective manner. You got to have a system and processes for gathering information, writing programs, delivering programs, so you can streamline it. And you've got to have a number of different approaches for different types of people. And you've got to pick your tools wisely, and be familiar with those tools and use something that really leans into your coaching style. If you're someone who is working with Gen Pop, you don't need the fancy apps that have all the metrics, right? You just need something that's going to get the client to easily follow their workouts. But if you're an advanced coach working with bodybuilders, powerlifters, you might want all those handy features. Yeah. But yeah, that's probably a good place to wrap things up. I think this was a useful conversation. I definitely think that if you are a coach, you'll benefit from all the things we've had to say. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to like, share, and drop us a comment. And any final
Stay tuned for our app as well.
Yeah, stay tuned and get
Updated
excited. You're a
information.
coach. Yep.
Right.
Peace out.